many people today think that child sacrifice, satanic rituals, witches and warlocks and mysticism are a thing of the past, or a thing that they see in movies that perhaps depicts old-time storytelling. They think that this storytelling from minds of old is conjured up from fantasy, dark thoughts, and ancient mysticism. They compartmentalize these stories into the same category as Count Dracula, for example, and believe that even if these things existed once, we have surpassed this now. We're a civilized society. What many people don't realize is that the reason this world is so upside down today is because these very things are still very prevalent, in fact, are in the open more today than perhaps ever in history. We are witnessing the great unveiling of this system before our very eyes. Nathan Reynolds is a survivor of a very powerful family that subjected him to ritual abuse as a child. This is a truly harrowing recollection, and he describes some of the most unspeakable acts being committed by people in power to this day. His story may shock some, but it's one that matters just as much today as it did yesterday, because this is still happening, and humanity is being subjected to powers beyond their understanding through their consent with this very system. This is why everything is so inverted. Nathan joins us after this short break to share insider secrets with us from these ancient cults in operation and in power today, and how he found freedom, a freedom that is available to every human being. We'll be right back. We're joined today by Nathan Reynolds, a gentleman with a fascinating story. I think everyone today is going to be shocked with what they hear, maybe not so shocked, depending on how open-minded you are. But Nathan, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Looking forward to being here with y'all.
Well, I guess I want to start with, if you don't mind, Nathan, your journey and what actually transpired across your life and what led you to speak out. I mean, it's a long story, but it's one that people really need to hear.
Well, indeed, it took me a long time to start to come to a place of understanding over the course of my life that the type of life that I had growing up was not usual, was not the ordinary experiences that other people had. And when you grow up in a culture that's catered to the conveniences and the comforts of a certain group of people, it creates a microcosm that just reinforces the system of what you kind of are raised in or trapped in. And so there was a learned helplessness that was developed through the early years of my life, growing up in a family that on one side of the surface was normal, was very middle class, lower middle class, just kind of background noise. And we moved around regularly in order to kind of hide and change people's perspective on what was going on as I was being raised in a society and in a group of people that practice an old religion. They call it the oldest religion. And that religion involves taking your children as a young age and bringing them up in a systemic way of control so that they produce for you this fruits of secrecy and a currency of coercion and blackmail and deceit. And it really is a dog eat dog style of raising up children. And so I started out my life believing that it was normal to have relationships that were very, very perverse or twisted, thinking that it was normal, thinking that family members interact this way. My family had a religious conviction to raise their children up according to this old religion standards. And that involved a lot of systemic, radical, physical, mental, psychological, and sexual abuse at very key moments of my life when I was developing and growing and maturing, to break bonds with my mom, to break bonds of relational connectivity with teachers or friends and peers. And so that I was always in this kind of chaotic, destabilized lifestyle. And it left me really traumatized. It left me perpetually traumatized. My family operates a lot of this kind of coven activity, this kind of occult activity. Occult's just another way of saying secret. It's not this like mystical thing necessarily, but they practice a divine right of pedophilia. And so they practice that from fathers down to sons, or grandfathers down to sons, grandsons. And so I was raised in a culture that continued that practice. And so my grandfather, a member of the Knights of Columbus is a fraternal brotherhood, the largest fraternal brotherhood in the United States, and it is a Catholic-based brotherhood. And so you have to be 18 years to join. And it started out basically becoming like the right hand of the Pope, and it is used in our country in particular as a means of recruiting people. It's like a big finders club for people that might want to be a part of this secret society for all intents and purposes. And as you are kind of filtered through, you are going to make different oaths and pledges and compromises as to your willingness to participate with the agenda collectively within your knights. And so I grew up in a town called Flagstaff, Arizona. And so it was steeped in the mountains of Arizona. And then we would travel between this high place called Humphreys Peak and the deserts down in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, where this great collection of Jesuits and people that are part of the brotherhoods would gather together in the deserts to participate in these rituals, in these activities where they were corrupting and perversing the lives of children in order to gain a spiritual power. And the children really are used almost like battery banks, and they're trafficked around amongst the families of the brotherhood. Different family members are handing their children off as a way of kind of compromising somebody else, and as a way of ensuring them being able to continue to be a part of this kingdom. And so it left me with a lot of confusion. It left me with a lot of frustration and total hopelessness, seeing my family members and other people I loved and cared about being forced through this institutionalized child. I mean, there's no better way to say it. I mean, it's a absolute systemic version of radical intelligent evil. Truly, this is from the kingdom of darkness. And so this spiritual power that they're pulling out from these traumas, from these events, it really is being funneled to these priests and funneled into these people. And it's just a radical destruction of the soul and of the identity.
Well, I think that there's a lot that's going on in society where this is actually starting to spill over into mainstream culture, and people don't really understand the parallels. Abusing children also looks like genital mutilation under the guise of gender affirming care. And this is really what I call modern day sacrifice to Moloch. And I want to get into that with you. But first and foremost, can you tell people who your family is?
Yeah, so my name is Nathan Reynolds. I come from a family known as the Reynolds family, and they are in our area and in our country a very powerful family that's developed massive financial, political, and corporate influence. And they did that from the early 1800s, making literal deals with evil spirits. And I know it sounds kind of peculiar because a lot of people might see this stuff as something that may be cartoonish, devils worshiping, people gather around in robes and bowing down to Satan with some pitchforks and horns. But really, the kingdom of darkness has a physical agents on this side of the earth that operate, giving themselves over to this kingdom of darkness for power, control, and the ability to exercise their will on this earth. They're grand master wizards and magicians, and these are people that have always had the king's ear, just like King Saul all the way back in the early days of Israel was going to the witch of Endor. Even though she was put out of the community, he's still going to the witches. We still have many of the individuals who are our leaders and our governing authorities that still consult with the witches and the mediums in order to have a spiritual power behind their system of control that they're trying to implement. And so it is a very ancient way, like you talked about. This is the sacrifices to Moloch that we read about all the way from the beginning in the scriptures. This is all the way back to the ways of Cain. Like my family participated with a group of Jesuits who trained people to slaughter and to enforce the oaths. And so they were like guardians of these oaths that they swear, and people that would go in and enforce these oaths that were sworn during these ceremonies. And at the time, back in the 90s, when this was going on for me in the early 90s and early 2000s, this was much less openly disclosed. There is this revelation of the beast system that's kind of coming forth into popular culture, and it's kind of they're demystifying the occult. They're lifting the veil as their counter to the revelation of the Messiah, the true Messiah, the one who comes with deliverance in mind. There's another system that is revealing itself to the masses right now, which is revealing the beast. And it's trying to create an altered image. It's trying to create a mingling between flesh and circuitry. It's trying to mingle the occult with the good. So it's not just good versus bad, it's evil versus bad. And they're joining themselves together, and they're trying to infect society with a massive spell It's called the Great Deception. It is the greatest, most effective deception that's being beguiling over the eyes of mankind. However, there is this remnant that's waking up, like you're describing right now, that this information is being brought forth. That because this is getting revealed, it's giving survivors, it's getting victims, it's giving people the opportunity to make a choice, that now you know who it is you're going to actually be a participant of versus who it is that you actually want to be on this earth. Do you want to be a part of this kingdom of righteousness or the kingdom of destruction? And I was firmly planted in the kingdom of darkness, and I wanted out. I wanted out because I'd gotten caught up in violence. I'd gotten caught up in murder. I'd gotten caught up in absolute, unutterable rage. And I was poisoned inside. I had death inside me. I was consumed by these evil spirits, and I wanted a way out. And I really saw the worldly system, the military, fighting soldiers. I could be a hero to the people. I thought violence was my way out. And it just led me into deeper places of darkness and self-despair and hatred than I ever had before in my life.
Well, this is interesting, Nathan, because you had this desire to get out of this. You knew, I'm guessing instinctively, even as a child, this doesn't really sit right, but it was normal. This is how you were raised. So, two things. I have two. I have so many questions for you, but you know, number one, I've heard you in the past talk about the fact that you were so surprised when you came out of this darkness that so many people were unaware of what it actually entails, that this is actually happening. Child sacrifice is actually real. These people actually make pacts with demons. They do ceremonies in the middle of the night. They drink children's blood. It is foul, 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 foul. And you were surprised and shocked at how many people didn't realize this was happening. So in order for people to realize this is happening, they have to be told. What are these people doing, Nathan, in the dead of the night or even midday? I mean, I don't know if they're, if they're doing this during the day. What are they doing?
That's a great question, and the specifics of what people do in secret. It said the Messiah literally said everything that people do in secret is going to be brought out to the rooftops. It's going to be shouted. And so I grew up still being taught that the scripture was true. And so I grew up with an identity that knew that this word could be trusted. And so when I started reading it at a young age, reading all the way from beginning to end, it helped to dismantle this mind control. It's a parasitic mind control that you get caught under. It's a spell that truly leads you away from the truth. And that came for me in a Lake Havasu City, Arizona is just like a microcosm of stuff that is replicated in all places of the earth. The city of London controls a peninsula in the United States territory. So it's almost like a sovereign territory of the city of London. The city of London, for those of you that may not be familiar with it, is a private, autonomous, independent country, much like the Vatican. And it operates outside of the legal limits of the rest of Great Britain. And so they have their own embassies almost in territories. And they began to build, they took the literal London Bridge that crossed the River Thames and they brought it over stone by stone and built it in the deserts of Arizona near the boundaries of Death Valley, an incredibly hot, very dry, desolate place, but it's along a river. And they brought that bridge over. And this bridge was famous for all of the hangings and the mutilations that took place on it. And it was the place of public executions. But it was also a place where they would take children and put them in the walls of the stones. They would take the facade stones off and encapsulate the children in the stones in order to maintain the societal structure, the physical and spiritual protection over that land for Gog and Magog, the two deities over the city of London. They literally have every year the Lord's Mayor parade. You can see for yourself. They bring out two giants, Nephilim, Gog and Magog, that are idols that the Lord Mayor himself bows down to. This is like the financial epicenter of the earth. The city of London is one of the most powerful places on the face of the earth. Their little tendrils have infected these areas. They get that power from these types of specific rituals taking place on their territories. And that city of London, that bridge, was used as a giant altar. And so it was put there in Arizona because it created legal anonymity for them to participate in these sex crimes with children and to participate in child exploitation rings that were operating out of a city that was centered around retirement-aged men being around children all the time. So it's a town that was built systemically to cater to the fulfillment of lusts and pleasures of people that wanted to participate in pedophilia with their children. So there was agencies that were brought in to help to facilitate that, almost like travel agents, and they take the children into these different places and they do perpetrate sex crimes against them. They particularly care to traumatize the children because it creates this fuel for the kingdom of darkness. It's like a frenzy for them, almost like a bloodlust, a ravenous wrath that breaks loose. And that's that like drug that these people get horribly addicted to. And I don't say this for those of you that are watching this, that have been a part of it, that are perpetrator side of it. I say this so that you understand and identify this is a reality, and the cost of it is incredible, because they're the ripples of generational destruction that take place on the life of a human being, of a child, when they're innocent and they're going through these traumas and they can't get out. It shatters their mind. It destroys their identities. It's designed to cause death. And it takes radical, consistent mercy and intervention and love with the truth brought together to be able to help get victims out of that mindset, to get perpetrators also to get set free and to be brought away from that captivity of the mind. And so those were some of the events that were taking place there in the city of London's territory and London Bridge that I was a part of. My family liked to participate in that and shattering of the mind, and my grandfather was a kind of well known for that. So I got stuck in that world of the continual destruction of the soul.
Is it a control thing, Nathan, or is it also control plus the spiritual power that they're accessing through these acts?
I would say it's a version of control, but it's also coercion. It's the same as like if you get a speeding ticket and you're forced to go before the court. There's a legal contract that these people get into with these beings. People have this idea that demons come in scary looking things and make deals with people and sign in contracts of blood. It's like a lawyer from a media company standing in front of you, showing you a contract for a business offer. That's literally more what it looks like. People think that when they hear a celebrity say, I sold my soul to the devil in order to get famous, it doesn't look like the type of deals that you're considering. It is sincerely a legal system that puts you in a contractual obligation with these people. And so it requires a covenant that can break it. It requires repentance. It requires forgiveness. It requires an appeal to a higher authority. It's like I appealed to the Supreme Court to break this off of me forever. And I had to go through that when I was 27 years old and my wife got pregnant with my daughter. And I realized I had a choice as a progenitor, as a family heir to this kind of wealth and fortune and influence in this phone book, if you will. You pick up a phone and call anybody and get anything you need. The cost in order to maintain that relationship and that money system was to pass my daughter Naomi off to the family, almost like as a trust event. Every couple of weeks they would have guardianship of her and they would get to do whatever they wanted to her, and I would have access to the trust fund. But I came to a place where I realized it was more valuable for me to see my children be given the opportunity to be choosers of their destiny, that they can make a choice for themselves, and that I could do everything I can to seek to protect them and set them free from that environment. So that's what really launched us on this journey of getting completely free from it, and then turning around and exposing the mechanics of the kingdom of darkness and the path that led me to freedom, and Yah willing will help to lead other people to freedom and restoration.
Well, we will talk about that because I think it's important to highlight that path to freedom. And I agree with the mechanism to obtain that freedom, Nathan. And because I started the occult growing up, I understand a lot of what you're saying in terms of the legality, the contracts. The spiritual laws operate not too dissimilar from natural laws in the way in which you're describing. So, why is it that these cults, and you mentioned this is an ancient cult, essentially a pedophilic cult, why is it that that it's specifically pedophilia that they cling to so much?
You know, a lot of it has to do with the immortal deities that are behind it. You're trying to realize it's important to maintain a longer term perspective on who it is you're fighting with and dealing with when you can, because you can go back to some of these specific cults and realize these people are practicing Crowley and black magic. And Aleister Crowley instituted a form of magic that a lot of people adhere to, and Helena Blavatsky, and it kind of created in our society this just unleashing of a mechanical break down a scientific method to get a phone number to different demons, to different principalities, powers, rulers, dominions, authorities, spiritual wickedness in high places, to the hierarchy. And so different fallen angels and different spirits have put their information out there in order to connect with him. And so the way that they do that, there's specific ones that are drawn through that utilize pedophilia as the mean to shatter and split the soul and unleash a targeted amount of energy that those spirits feed off of. And so it fuels that kind of kingdom force. Other people really get into familiar spirits and talking to the dead and engaging in necromancy. Other folks get drawn away into fortune telling and astral projection. There's kind of like these spirits of this hierarchy that are always offering, hey, if you want to have these powers, these experiences, these intercourses, this is the way to get there. It's like the version of it that most people are familiar with now is like the metaverse, or it's this virtual reality where you create your own world and you can have that can be your little identity, and we will only cater to what you want to see in there. And that's like what these spirits do, is they corrupt the mind to make it content with doing anything that those spirits want. They're continually hungry and never able to be satisfied. They're continually thirsty and never able to be filled. And it's all about the blood. It becomes all about the life, because the life is in the blood. And when people begin to get drawn away into this snare, it leads them into the deepest levels of destruction and of self-deprivation. And that is to the consumption of human blood. It's the consumption of these defiling, abominable things. And as they start to mix those together, it really does create a form of black magic that has been around for a long time. And it goes all the way back to the doctrines of Cain. It goes back to slaying a man and take that blood that cries out day and night. Abel's blood cried out forever. For thousands of years, it's been crying out at this witness. So when there's spilling of innocent blood, when there's trauma, when there's destruction of innocence, there is a echo in the spiritual realm. And so the way that we can seek deliverance from that, like I went back to these places where these events happened in Arizona, and I prayed and I asked forgiveness for the things that happened there, things that I did, things that others did to me. And I asked for repentance, deliverance to be authorized into those areas. And you can see it does change the spiritual atmosphere as you seek diligently to come out of it, as you seek to help others come out of it. It purifies the earth. That's what we were made to do, is set people free, not put them in bondage.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I know many stories, and I've had many experiences myself with this, that the power of prayer over someone who's in this kind of bondage, who's been mixing with the dabbling in the occult, dabbling in the new age, dabbling with psychics, mediums, this sort of thing, and how quickly this breaks from them, even to the point of, sleep paralysis and things of this nature. It's the power of words in that prayer and the application of the faith for that person. It unlocks something, because ultimately Jesus is victorious over these entities, and they can't withstand the name and the power and the authority of Jesus. I mean, that's the ultimate thing here. But it's, again, there are many people in my audience, Nathan, who are not Christians. They are atheists, or they are of other religions. And I always say, you may not believe this. They do. The globalists
Yes, right.
that run this world, they believe it. So if you want to know your enemy, which an enemy has to be known to be defeated, you don't go into a war blind. If you want to know your enemy, you have to understand how they think. So these people, and you've described one of these cults, there are many. I want you to talk about, if you will, your family, who are very powerful, and other families who are very powerful, who are actively partaking in this as a way of life.
The reason you find families getting caught up in this is because, like, if you just take the Reynolds family in particular, if you go back a few generations into the early 1800s, before Reynolds in the Americas, there's a aluminum company, like wrap, cellophane, plastic bags, Ziploc bags, that kind of stuff. They also own a huge amount of the food production. About a sixth of all the food that's produced and sold and transported in the United States comes through the hands of the Reynolds family. And so they got into these big business deals because back in the early 1800s, they followed this old religion and were carriers of something called the Judas coin. And so they had this coin that they believed was one of the coins, 30 pieces of silver, that Jesus or Yeshua was betrayed by Judas with. And so anybody who possesses that coin, they believe that if you made a deal with the spirits that were behind it and you spilled blood and made an oath over it. Whenever you touch that coin to anything, you'd grow a fortune, you'd grow a titan of wealth and influence. But the cost was always on the other side of it, because in this form of magic, there's always like a trade. There's always an exchange that's required. And the cost was always life. The cost was always much blood and violence. And these people specifically join themselves to a dragon cult. And so it's like serpent eaters, and people that get caught up in this version of it, they really give children over to this system. And so this led to an industry here in the Americas that has poisoned systemically the lives of people in a drastic and continual way with all of the, I mean, there's just no other way around it. The intentional aluminite, they've taken all the byproducts of the aluminum production and they literally force feed it to us through the air, through our water, through the drinking water, through all the additives that they have. They systemically poison the population and then sell them the very symptom management. And they created a medical industry to support that. And so a lot of that came, if you go all the way back to the epicenter, you're going to find deals made with with spirits. And it's a really peculiar thing if you're not raised in a society that thinks there is any type of spiritual world, but it's the mechanics of how these people govern a society. It's they are raised in schools that are very different than the schools that you are raised in. These are schools that raise kings. These are schools that raise the ambassadors and the curators of society. It's not the same school system that you went to. And if you're going to control a society, you need a spiritual grounds to do it, and you need a legal right to do it. And so this is the divine right of kings. I come from a bloodline of people that believe if this blood is in your body, you literally have a legal right to rule the world, and that you are not the same kind of human as the rest of the other people. And so that gives them, that they believe, the right to slaughter, wholesale, consume, and use like cattle, like property, all the rest of society, all the rest of mankind, because they are culture shapers. And so this kind of comes in as you start to feed these other spirits. Pride consumes people. They get blinded by it. They get beguiled by it. And then they're caught up in this system that requires perpetual bloodshed to maintain it.
How many people that are ruling the world now, as you say, and we know some of the faces, although I would say that the faces that we know are not really the top puppet masters. How many of them are doing this, Nathan? And how likely is it that you have a president or a prime minister or, the head of the IMF? How likely is it that they're not participating in this ancient religion?
It's a pretty broad question to try to make an assumption about every area. However, I think the best choice for people to do is analyze the individual leaders that you're trying to know where they're at. However, like wholesale, if you start to identify the leaders that you want to look at, and you look into the background of the society, of the schools that brought them up, of the mentorship that they had, what you start to find is almost inevitably this convenient compromise that slipped into their life at various stages of it. And whether that was a mentor that came in and started to teach them some of these ways, like Hillary Clinton is one of our preeminent leaders, a Secretary of State here in the United States, contender for presidency. She's someone who has publicly stated how she's interacting with these other spirits. She's talking to the dead spirits of Eleanor Roosevelt. The former president's wife here in the United States was well known to interact with all these sorcerers back in the early 1900s, when there was this outbreaking I mean, they made it cool. They made it fun to talk to they called them talking bots. It's where their television came from. People were trying to talk to other spirits. They wanted to get into this other realm, the prince of the power of the air, and they wanted to interact with them. Because if he's got the keys to the kingdom and you want to go take the car out for a ride, you got to go to him to get permission to do so, because there really is a hierarchy of spiritual powers that govern creation. And then there is a inverted version of it. And then there's human agents that operate based off of the will and the desire of those. So like when you go up to presidential levels, when you go up to the IMF, when you go up to the WHO or any of these other positions, you're still watching human agents within there. However, most of them have been groomed and beguiled in just a very worldly way, a very scientism, a very religious scientific order that extrapolated away any spiritual realities, so that they can continue to utilize those individuals to guide society in a direction that's contrary to the scriptures, that's contrary to truth. And so the best thing to do that is to get people that are already well indoctrinated into a system of beliefs. Whereas I don't see regularly the main leaders and governors having talking to evil spirits, drinking the blood, and all these other things. We don't have great evidence to support some of those claims. We do have evidence by their fruits, how they are being inspired by these other spirits to make these decisions, how they are leading society in a direction to augment everybody. And if you're not willing to do so, that we're going to control you, we're going to put you in camps, we're going to re-educate you, we're going to lock down your ability to move and travel or do anything, and you're going to sit and stay when we tell you to. And if you don't, we're going to take you out and we're going to destroy you. But that's not the system of deliverance that we're supposed to have in our lives.
I agree with you, and I think that that's a fair assessment. The television comment that you made is very interesting. Talk to us about what you meant by that. Why did they use the television?
The television was created as a desire. The individuals that were starting out with the first kind of technology and dabbling with it really were creating some of the first images that were ever broadcast were like the Rosicrucian cross, like people that were trying, Knights Templar, people that were trying to talk to these spirits during these rituals wanted a tool, a medium. A medium is something that goes in between two things. There's wires in between me and you right now. There's cables all the way under the ocean taking the signal to you. Like there's a medium that allows one person to talk to another person. And so the goal of many of these groups has always been, how do I talk to the other side? How do I talk through the other realms? And so when the photographs began to come around in the early 1800s and into the early 1900s, up into the motion pictures and television, they were using these boxes to talk to these spirits. They could get these sounds to come through on the radio waves. They could get these sounds to come through on speakers. And so the occult surrounded it at its early stages, and they brought money, financing, and institutionalized, scientifically institutionalized, and then merchandised a way to talk to other spirits, a way to put propaganda in people's living rooms. Because this tool, this screen that you and I are using to communicate, is to this day the most effective form of advancing an agenda that you can have, is get people to voluntarily sit down in front of a black mirror. People used to scry and talk to other spirits by staring at black mirrors or black pools of water. It's been around forever as a means of talking to other spirits. Now people are voluntarily doing it. They're making their shrine in the middle of their living room kind of their like main spot to hang out and get their information. And so they tuned even the very frequencies of the television, the flicker rates, to help put people in a more of a trance state so that people would be more receptive to the information that's coming their way. And you watch the systemic change of society's morality over the course of about 80 years, 100 years. And there was the degradation and the destruction of that morality to where we have generations being raised without a basic concept of humanity, basic concept of nature, of how things ought to function, how they were made, what is important, what matters in life, how to find value. And instead they've been lost. They've been scattered. And you know what? This is a time of confusion, but it says clearly that the Father is not the author of confusion. He is the author of peace. And so if we're seeing confusion, we're seeing the fruits of a different kingdom.
Yes, yes. I want to ask you about AI, Nathan, because you mentioned before merging the human being with circuitry, which is the transhumanist movement. And if I'm not misunderstanding scripture where it says that the final kingdom is iron mixed with clay, but it's not going to succeed, I believe that that's what we're seeing. What role does AI play in this? I see it as a digital Ouija board.
That's an excellent analogy to it. I got brought in back in about 8 years ago. I brought in as a security consultant with a technology firm that was starting up outside of Denver. And these were people that were on the cutting edge of data storage. They were trying to be able to store petabytes of data in like a phone. So huge amounts of storage in a little space. And these people, in order to get their technology, would lay down and sleep and try to take certain substances to open up their mind and talk to these spirits. They called them aliens. Others that were within this group were called them, spirits. And when they would wake up, they would have these full blueprints, literal schematic blueprints to this different technology. And they were using that to create prototypes to then try to govern the society and the life of the people around them. And it was just this window of where I was brought in and kind of could see behind the veil of how these spirits are using people as the medium to create the technology to allow them to then interact to the lives of more and more people. And so when you start to look carefully at AI, because I was in that group, they started connecting with a lot of AI people because they had this data storage thing, and AI requires huge amounts of data storage. and the different types of computing speed that were needed. And so we got to these like AI conventions. And what you see there is that a lot of the designers and the architects, the people that actually like write the logic and the rules, there's like rules that govern every AI. There's a lot of them are in that kind of scientific religion that they don't view the world as anything but physical matter. If I can't see it, touch it, taste it, smell it, observe it, it doesn't exist. And so I understand people that are in a perspective of agnostic or atheistic, that that's what they've known, that's all they've experienced. But even these designers of these programs, they get to this level of system interaction where the things do not stay within the confines of those rules, where there can be these outliers. And this is where AI technology does get bridged by those spirits. Those spirits do interject their ideas into it. I know right now Chat GPT is one of these that's famous and everyone is using it, and people are utilizing it for business and money making and advertisement and books, and people are using it for all these different things, and they're making it desirable. They're making it so it's making their lives easier, right? It's convenient. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you energy. You're going to be more productive. But the reality is this stuff is designed to lead you out of the natural order, that it is designed to make you desire a kingdom, a reality that's not real, that's not authentic, that's digital ones and zeros in a vault that doesn't exist anywhere but in your mind. And as people begin to desire it more and more, even now, like they shut down the entire shipping ability or shopping ability of people in our country. They locked it down. I know they locked it down where you're at, anywhere that was under the ground, but they locked it down so hard that people were required to have this digital way of interacting with the world to get goods to come to their door.
Yes.
And so they're making it to where people it's necessary to have it. They're overcomplicating their lives, and then they're going to offer this solution. And the solution is a different kingdom. It really is. It's a kingdom that's called techno. It's like a technocracy. It is a mixing of this digital currency with a physical spiritual sorcery, and it's going to mystify the earth because people will take this stuff into their lives, into their bodies, and they will augment themselves, and they're going to change themselves out of the image of their creator they were made to have, and they're going to start rewriting their DNA. Like even now, people utilizing CRISPR technology, and they're augmenting their physical biomass in their homes, and they're changing themselves into the image of another thing. And it says very clearly in the scriptures, like you said in Daniel, that it's prophesied. There's this other kingdom that's going to show up, and they're going to mix iron and clay, and you're going to start trying to mix this circuitry with flesh, and it's not going to stick. They're going to tear each other apart. You're not supposed to mix two unlike fibers. Like linen with wool is like an animal and a plant. They're unlike kinds. And when you put them together, the linen, when you wash it, can go in boiling hot water and it never changes. But the wool, if you put it in hot water, it's going to shrink like crazy and it rips the garment apart. And this is what's going to happen as people begin to intertwine themselves deeper and deeper. Even now in the United States, they approved Neuralink. And so that people can start jacking their brains in to be able to be interconnected with their Internet of Things in their houses and start to interact. But they're creating a prison cell for themselves. The natural order is not needing any of those things, that you can find freedom from good quality food and nutrition and quality fellowship and family and friends and community, that you can live an authentic life that doesn't require all of the faux pas industry that they're trying to cater to us.
All right, so I want to ask you about this now. The Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Things, the consent of the individual, what role the consent of the individual in engaging with these things plays, because I think that's important for people to understand. For example, Nathan, I found just in my Instagram reels the other day, someone talking about the fact that you can put in a link to an AI website and it'll make 100 promotional videos for you for an interview. It takes me anywhere up to half an hour to make a promotional video of 90 seconds for my interviews, because I actually care what I'm putting out there. And I thought, gosh, that would save me so much time, 100 promotional videos in a matter of seconds. But I'm actually engaging with this technology that I know spirits are all over. So I won't do that because I'm opening a door for them. If you can explain first for the people how this works, this matter of consent in the physical realm, when engaging, not physical, sorry, the traditional sense of engaging with spirits compared to doing this with technology.
Well, our society has been culturally engineered to accept digital forms of covenants, digital forms of agreements. Like you said, all you have to do is this website was just put the content in, it's going to generate it for you. Like lifesaver. Somebody else asked me if I wanted to generate all these thumbnails for all of my videos and stuff, that we could just use this AI software to crank it out in minutes. And I, like you, I think that you're giving consent to this very system that you're actually fighting against, and you need to be so careful. And I respect so much that you have not consented to give into that, because I get it. It would save tremendous amount of time, but time saving is not the goal in life. Time saving is the illusion. Like, there's a reason we were designed to experience certain things slowly. Like, you cannot raise a baby any faster than the baby's going to be raised. But if you want to shortchange it, that's the kingdom of darkness stuff. Anytime the enemy comes alongside, it's like the drug dealer that's like, I could immediately relieve your pain if you just go ahead and try this. It'll immediately take you to a different place. But the longer term solution is going to be to re-engineer your life. Is to change the vast majority of the decisions that you make in your life. This one's going to require sacrifice. This one's going to require dedication and discipline. This will change you completely. This will augment who you are temporarily until you need to come back for more. And the AI system has been created right now. It's being released now to us to be like, hey, the public now can have access to something that people have been utilizing for 20 years, that big businesses just devour the world and swallow the world. The merchants of the earth, as they're called in the scripture, they utilized these tools 20, 30 years ago to devour all of us, to put a giant invisible prison system around us. We now have to sit here and evaluate carefully, hey, if I make my consent there, it's going to cause ripples of realities in my life. Like, there was a project that this technology group was working on that was called Access Hannah. Access Hannah was outside of Boulder, Colorado. There's this chapel. They call it the Jesus Chapel. And it's a very counterfeit version of biblical anything. They've basically taken a biblical model and they've mixed it with AI. They've mixed it with techno sorcery. And so they are in like an old Catholic chapel, and they've taken an AI that they've developed as a server, and they surrounded it based off this woman as the model architect for it. And she was a homeopathic healer, a naturopathic healer, but then she really got down into the occult with the New Age, and they started utilizing all these different forms of medicines and healings that were really right out of the occult. And so they took, after she died, they wanted her to be a part of the AI. And so they did ceremonies to try to bind these two together so that Hannah was the AI. And this AI, if you give it your birth date, if you give it your name and your birth date as consent, it then will look through the entirety of your life, much like a spirit would. And it'll tell you every time you got injured. It would tell you every time everything that you ever, if you fell and broke your collarbone when you were 6 years old, it's going to have that in its list. It's going to tell you every time you went to visit a doctor. It's going to tell you every time you ever had an injury that you didn't even know about. All of this information comes immediately, like a perfect diagnostic tool for the person's life. Then it puts out all of the supplementation routines. Then it put out just as a click of a button. And so then you could give it permission to broadcast the frequencies and structure your water and give you the medicines and the herbs, and that it would broadcast all of this healing into you from afar. And so this AI was the one that was doing all of that. Simultaneously, as I was going to this chapel and seeing this demonstration, watching different, coworkers of mine go through this and volunteer to give themselves over, there was a Christian version of it that another minister that I knew was utilizing the same exact software, but with a different name on it, just rebranded to do diagnostic tools for people that were trying to get healing on a different level. He compromised and gave in and was like, that's a great diagnostic tool, and I could use that in my ministry. And I think that's just the biggest dangers that we can get sucked away into through this, is that just to save time, just to save money, just to grow a kingdom for yourself, you're going to compromise. And that's the very same word, like I was saying earlier, that gets people caught up in the kingdom of darkness. It's compromise. Maintain your convictions, and you don't get caught up in the snare of these things.
Nathan, speaking of compromise, I want to get your thoughts on this because you understand this spiritual exchange. Getting a needle is a form of a blood covenant. Am I wrong?
No, it's mixing blood for certain.
So with
other things.
It's consenting, because that person, there is a drawing of blood as that injection is being administered. It's giving your blood to consent to something. That's a blood covenant. It's actually a lot more serious than people understand. What do you think happened during the COVID era? I mean, what sort of danger are the people that went ahead with these injections in? Spiritual.
Well, great question. When people are in a state of terror, a shock, a kind of a very baseline emotional panic state, they're a lot easier to manipulate and they're a lot easier to control. And this is why, like, we have a society that heightens emotions as much as possible. When you're watching a normal show or you're watching something and all of a sudden the commercials are super loud and intense, it's designed to kind of shock you a little bit and grab you. They did this so powerfully to the entire world. They tried to systemically shock and traumatize the earth because this allows them to move the agenda much more rapidly down the court, down the field. They can advance it much more quickly. And so they had all the world feeding this fear, feeding this kingdom of terror. I mean, absolute dread, fear of your neighbors like nobody's ever had in their life, fear of everything, fear of the air they were breathing, the water they were drinking, everything. So that fear, it was the fuel for the spiritual side of everything. And what it allowed them to move this agenda down the road to where people are augmenting themselves. Like it says, one of the books that was very helpful for me in identifying the specifics of how the kingdom of darkness operated was the book of First Enoch and Jasher and Jubilees. These were books that are mentioned in the scriptures a lot of times or quoted from the scriptures, but First Enoch makes a lot of specific explanations of the fallen angels that came down and taught secrets of heaven to mankind, and they mingled themselves with women. In Genesis chapter 6, it talks about these sons of Elohim that come down and mix themselves with women and create these Nephilim, these giants. Yes. And it said by them the world was altered. They are shapeshifters. They are ones that are metaskizmazotoi is the Greek word in the scriptures that describes these people that like don't marvel at Satan or his messengers, his apostles, because they change themselves into angels of light. That word change, they transform themselves. They really are transformers. And so they want to get people to desire augmenting themselves, to corrupt their image. And that one of the most effective ways to do that is through gene editing, is through splicing people's DNA apart and doing experimental gene therapy on them. When I was back in the United States military at 17 years old, I got emancipated to the United States Army, and I went off because I wanted to go hunt and kill people. I wanted to kill bad guys. I didn't care who it was. I just wanted to stop the bad people. And they did all kinds of experimental gene therapy on me at the time. They lined up soldiers and just give them shot after shot after shot. People were oozing out black oil from their feet. People were puking and retching their guts and their intestines out. I mean, I saw some horrific experiments that were being done on soldiers in the military back in 2006, 2007. And though to see kind of the fruition of this gene editing obsession take over the world as the cure, as the solution, this will save your life. You can trust us. They took all of their trust bank accounts and they cashed it in on injections. And you got to recognize that this really is an altering of the identity of the individual molecularly. At the base level of what makes a person, you have this going on. Now we have people that are contaminated with something that is corrupting their image. It's not to say total condemnation against any of you. I have been abominated in the most horrific, strategic, awful ways. And yet I have seen deliverance come into my life through the power of making a conscious choice to go no longer into that, to no longer consent. That may have happened yesterday. They may have happened last year or 2 years ago during that COVID craze, but that I no longer consent. It's the most powerful choice that you have, is to abstain from somebody's coercion. Used car salesman, buy, limited time offer. You better pressure sales. Don't give in to any of that stuff. Be patient while enduring, and you will find that this is how you guard your soul.
Well, I want to talk about your journey of coming out of this, because what you've described is a relatively normal life, despite the fact that all of this was going on behind the scenes. I've heard you describe even going to church with this family that was doing these things to you in the shadows. And also you went and served in the military. You albeit seeing some horrific experimentation on these soldiers, and we know they've been working on augmenting soldiers for some time to improve them and create, super soldiers, and now that technology is being unleashed on humanity, but not for the right reasons, and not with people's consent either. But this journey of living these, I mean, you essentially had a double life, Nathan. How did, what was the process of your awakening to the truth? You mentioned even having access to scripture as a child. Meanwhile, your family's doing satanic rituals. How did this, what happened here?
The incongruity of it is because there's two sides. What happens at the early ages, they design a system to split the mind and to cause a fracturing of the soul and to create separate identities, and one side that's given over to good and one side that's given over to evil, or one side that's light and the other side's darkness, a day side and night side. And on one side, it's like there is a compartmentalization of information so that certain members of my family were not participatory of it at all, and it created plausible deniability for them, so that they saw echoes of what was happening over here, but they weren't directly participants in it. And so, like, my great grandfather was a president of the American Society of Civil Engineering, and he came from the East Coast side of the country, and they were much more into like embracing a Luciferianism. And so this is more like Freemasonry, this quest for knowledge as godhood, and that society catered towards this enlightenment. Whereas there was another fraction of the occult, like from the Knights of Columbus and the Jesuits, and they were ones that were the serpent worshipers. These were people that embraced the dragon, and they did have their own ways of governing and raising their families. And my dad, my father, earthly father, had his own version of trying to kind of break away and start in Christianity, biblical Christianity, and try to stay away from it. But meanwhile, we had family members that were still coming in and getting a hold of me and taking me out and utilizing me and exploiting me and trafficking me. They'd have me shipped down there for a couple weeks during the summer, and whatever happened down there, and then we don't talk about it when it comes down. It just creates this family of secrecy, because shame is such a powerful tool to govern a child. If you shame them over sexual immorality, over incest or pedophilia, they lock that identity up with them, and that becomes the one that experiences the trauma, the pain, the suffering. And then the other personality, the other side of their soul, goes out into the world and interacts with the rest of the world, and it still tries to maintain a somewhat normal nature. But it was like cracks bleeding out for me all throughout my life. There was horrific depression and self-hatred, and just an absolute desire to die just consumed my life for so long. I wanted to die. I didn't care how or what. I just wanted my life to be over. I couldn't even imagine living past 18 years old. I could not physically imagine ever living that far. I'd seen so much death so often that I was saturated in it. And so the military appealed to me as a kingdom of death. I mean, they are literally covenant keepers of death himself. You stand there and you swear the day you're sworn into the United States military, you swear a specific oath to protect this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to guard the Constitution. So help me God. The God they're talking about there is literally the God of fortune, and it's a totally different deity to the one that people think about. And so I got yoked up into that system, and it wasn't for a couple of years that I got out. I got out of there. I had severe injuries in the military. I lost my identity while I was in there, and it just shattered me. It shattered me. And I came out of there just this shell of a man, started going to college in Boulder, Colorado, and I got desperate for help, desperate for healing, desperate for relief. And I was far enough away from a lot of my
can I just ask
handlers.
you? Oh, well, you were about to say you were far enough away, so
Yeah,
the abuse was not physically occurring at that point.
right. And it was during that couple year window that I finally got the opportunity to start to process and take these pieces of this puzzle that were scattered around all the place and start to fit them together and make understanding out of what had only ever been confusion. And I started a relationship with a woman who's my wife now, and she began to help me to understand love in a home, like even seeing her family and her parents and siblings. And I got to start spending super concentrated amounts of time around normal people, people that didn't come from families where incest was normal, people that would not tolerate anything like that, that it was not okay, that if somebody came out against it, the victim wasn't the one who was persecuted, it was the perpetrator who was persecuted. And so it started to change my understanding of what normal was. And it literally, though, it wasn't until a couple of years into my marriage that I felt safe enough that my wife wasn't going to leave me, that my family wasn't going to be executed for talking about all this stuff, that I started to share it with Chelsea, my wife. And I started to be vulnerable enough to admit, this is the stuff I've been through. And the more I talked to her, the more I saw how contrasting my life, my childhood was to hers. That no, it was not normal. These things were happening to you and your family members. This is how it should have been. And it just started to create a insatiable curiosity to know then, what is the truth? What is family? What is my identity? What is my purpose? And it began to go and find that identity in the scriptures. And I'll say it plainly, because that is where I found my identity. I looked in all kinds of various texts and ancient historical books. I looked all over for who I was and what I am made to be. And this is the place where I found it to be resoundingly true. Altered by man in some ways, and yet preserved by our creator for our good and for our life and for our sustenance, but more importantly, for our deliverance and restoration. And so it's been 7 years since I kind of came out of that. My firstborn daughter, she's almost 7 years old now. I've got a growing family, and we've been traveling all over the country for the past few years.
Driving to the big cities. I've been wandering this desert.
Not quite as thrilling as the open road.
Never knowing where I'm gonna go. Feeling lonely as I wander, but I was seeking answers when I felt your spirit touch my soul. I'd never know surrender, but I laid down my heart's desire, and I let go of my control. My flesh is telling me to run away, to turn back from this place, but you're all I wanna know. So I shines the morning sun.
Naomi loves it. This is great. Throw him by Naomi now, Dad.
Gives us our instruction. Yeah, it's only you that shows me who I am when everything seems to go wrong. It's only you that helps me in the night, guiding me along. Oh, it's only you guiding me along. I wanna know more of you. Come now and reveal the truth. I wanna walk the narrow road.
Wow.
To the living word you lead me, and you satisfy completely. You show me things that I never know. Keeping Sabbath there being me, like Yahuwah has
Yep,
shown
you're
us
perfect. Keep
holy.
going.
Riding tore down within my soul. Yeshua walked the path perfectly, and I will follow in his lead. For he made Sabbath a stone. It's only in the shine of the morning sun. It's only in the
We're going on to courageous
instruction.
because I've got a sifting pen, a proper professional, patented approved project for finding treasure. Did you know there's the greatest treasure in all the world? We're gonna find that today too.
Guiding me along. Oh, it's only you guiding me along.
Oh, shalom. We're going on an adventure.
What it means to be holy, making the ways my way, following the righteous path. How could I turn aside to the left or the right when you show your favor to the broken, weary sinners? We all don't deserve the love that the Father has given us, but yet He has delivered you and me from the power of the enemy. So don't turn back or look away, for Yah alone has given grace, so that you and I can live to see His face. It's only you that shines the morning sun. It's only you that gives us our instruction. Yeah, it's only you that shows me who I am when everything seems to go wrong. It's only you that helps me in the night, guiding me along. Oh, it's only you guiding me along. Oh, it's only you guiding me along. Oh, it's only you guiding me along.
Oh my gosh.
He nipped at the camel cat. Camel cat. I'm gonna name you Cat.
Just dripping everywhere.
Cool. Are you ready? Yes. Don't tell us. Get back on, Lord. There, don't tug so hard.
And my life trajectory has made a completely different course now. And I couldn't be more hopeful for people that are still caught up in it, that they themselves can be brought out no matter what their circumstances are and find restoration and healing.
Can I ask why you're still alive?
I mean, at the end of the day, the only thing that keeps me alive is because we have an ultimate authority on this earth. And if our Father in heaven doesn't give permission for us to be destroyed, we cannot be destroyed. And my life has already, I died a long time ago. I can't say this enough. My life has then taken over from what it used to be. And I died when I was immersed, baptized, and a new man came to life. And my life is preserved with my Father in heaven, and he can give it to me or he can take it away. It's his, you know, and I just want to be a servant for him on this earth until he says otherwise. And I am here to be a witness and an ambassador to his people and to anybody who's willing to listen, that there's hope no matter the circumstances, and that my family is a living witness to that. He doesn't have to preserve our life, but he's chosen to do so. And it's his great mercy and his loving kindness to do that. But I believe that my family's purpose is here is to be a beacon of light to others that are lost in the darkness, to understand that I'm called to be a city on a hill. It says you can't hide that light that's burning brightly on the top of a mountain. I come from the mountains of Arizona and Colorado, and I used to live above 7,000 feet most of my life. And there was one house on this hill in Manitou Springs, Colorado, and it was on top of a 600-foot hill. One house. Day and night you could always see it, but at night you could see it the most clearly. And that is what we're supposed to be. We're not supposed to learn the truth and then be filled with fear. We're supposed to learn the truth and be filled with faith. We're supposed to be filled with convictions that, you know what? Who cares if we die? The truth is that there are people who give their lives up for telling the truth every single day, and they never get any press coverage. And you know what? You've had people on your show that you've interviewed that died. You understand that there's a cost to this. This is a war. This is a war. And like, I'm a soldier in that battle, and I'm not supposed to concern myself with trivial things. And you know what? I was taught to be a soldier in the ways of this world, but you know what? There's a way of being a soldier for the kingdom of righteousness that is so much more effective, that instead of just killing my enemies, like I killed my enemies and I watched two other people show up the next day and take their place. I watched the next day more and worse people come into the position of authority as somebody else that I just killed. And I realized this is futility. I'm chasing the wind here. You can't just stomp these bad guys out. You can't just replace Bill Gates with somebody else. You can't just eradicate your prime minister and then it all goes back to normal. There is an ancient agenda that is being forced upon the souls of mankind, and it is designed to imprison them and drag them away to a place of destruction, despair, and loneliness. But there is an alternative. There is an option that is absolutely full of hope, but it requires sacrifice. It requires the death of the old man and the old woman and who you wanted to be and who you thought you could be, and willingness to just go on the journey and follow him wherever he leads you.
Amen, Nathan. I think what I was referencing was whether there have been attempts on your earthly life to silence you.
Absolutely. Yes, especially in the very beginning, the first year and a half, my wife and I went through regular attempts of people coming at us and trying to murder us. When my wife was 7 months pregnant with my daughter, Naomi, we were coming out of a movie theater and we had people that tried to shoot my wife and I and to kill her. And this was literally exactly 7 years ago. And it's kind of crazy to read my book. I wrote a book called Snatched from the Flames, which talks about a lot of the season of it to try to memorialize it. And as a reference for people that maybe are very unfamiliar with some of these topics we're talking about, as a way of reading it from the perspective of how to understand this, because some of you might have family members who come out with these kinds of information, or you might have friends or associates. This is written in a way to try to give a idea of understanding about it. And so I talk about this event where I saw people pointing guns at my wife and I, trying to pull the trigger, and weapons jamming in front of my face. I saw multiple weapons jam in front of my face and people not able to fire. I've never had to get in a gunfight. I've never had to fight for my life physically on this earth. We've had People send drones, massive drones the size of vehicles, to try to come down on our car. We've had people with giant knives come in stores to try to stab us, and them not be able to see us in a room full of people staring at us, not be able to see us. We have seen the Father make us invisible to the enemy, stop cars in their tracks. We have seen all kinds of miracles take place because it really is a spiritual kingdom. And if the Father, the governor of all creation, decides to preserve and protect your life, there's nothing that can take you out of his hand. And like, that's the reason I seek deliverance of others, because I've seen him preserve my life. I've seen him stop. I mean, people were leaving chunks of flesh, horrible desecration and rituals they were trying to do in our neighborhood. And to my wife and I, they sacrificed a child that was in our neighborhood. Her name was Jessica Ridgway. It was a very famous case out here in Colorado. Horrible lengths that they were willing to go to try to silence this stuff. But you can't keep truth silent. You can't. It is required to go forth. Every time you sow out the word, it never returns fruitless. Like, because people like you and others are out here willing to advance the truth, the kingdom of darkness will always lose to a single light burning brightly on a hill.
Amen, Nathan. I think truly, we don't live with a spirit of fear, and a lot of people say that, but it's a decision. It's a decision. Fear not, for I am with you. Take courage. These are instructions that are given to us that we can do something with. It requires our participation. It requires our consent, much like the other side requires consent, because we are agents of free will. And it's so crucial in the times that we're living in that we utilize that free will for the right reasons. I want to ask you really quickly, and I know that we've taken up a lot of your time today, and we appreciate it. I want to ask you about the parallels today. I mentioned this at the outset, the parallels today, because you mentioned, okay, this scientism, it's essentially a religion now. They've developed this cult. Not everyone's part of the club. Not everyone's participating in sacrifices and getting power from these entities, but they have been brainwashed to an extent. Some of these scientists, some of these doctors, some of the people working for the WHO, I'm sure they're not, all of them participating in these rituals. So some of them have been brainwashed by the system that those who do participate in this were given directly from these entities on how to deceive humanity. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. Very clear instructions get disseminated out through the hierarchy in order to advance these agendas. This is why you can take one of your prime ministers and pull them out and put a different party prime minister in that position and watch the same basic agenda advance. We experience this in the United States with presidents and Congress and Senate and our governing authorities, our judges, our magistrates, our officials. When you see positions on the crown changing, who is the king of England? When you see these changes happen, people are looking for the ripples of what will take place. But often what you see, if you actually pay attention, is a continuity of the trajectory, no matter who's in position, because what you're looking at is somebody who is the figurehead. They are an idol. For all intents and purposes, like Beyonce is a priestess of her church of B. Like, she literally is participating in this techno sorcery to be a woman who shows the world how to make technocracy and techno sorcery sexy, how to make it a cult that people follow and give their worship to. She is a channeler of all that worship that comes in, and she directs it to the deity that's behind her. That's a priest. That's a priestess. There are people who are in those positions knowingly, voluntarily, like Madonna, people that are like, they've given themselves over to be that conduit, to be the medium, to be the witch of Endor. And then there's other people that are just looking to do their job. They just want to make enough money to get through the day-to-day. They just want enough creature comforts to satisfy their family's needs for a generation or two. That's it. And those people are brought in alongside the priestess, alongside the person who has the instructions from the other side. And they are used as like a giant organism that's a part of this beast system. There's a reason there's an unveiling of the beast and his army. I mean, that requires generations of preparations. And so you have the families, these are the old ancient order, divine right to rule families that are the governors of the underlings. And they're the ones who a lot of times have that sit down communications, and then they disseminate it out through their power and supply chains to make it get reinforced, to make it be brought to life, because that's what their magic is. The spells only work if you obey them. You know, we only give our consent over when we go ahead and volunteer and say, all right, yeah, I'll do it. That's when we give our will over. That's when the spell has power. But you can break that at any time. But like you said, by abstaining, by saying, no, I don't consent. And then you become the outlier. Then you become the outlier. You get set free. It said all the way back in the days of Exodus. It's a very famous story. People hear about these all their life. They're like, yeah, they were killing all the baby boys that were being born because they feared it. But the Pharaoh was consulting with his magicians and his wizards to come up with a way to get the spiritual power from killing the Israelite babies. They were taking the baby boys and they were taking them and putting them in the place of the missing bricks. When the Israelites missed a quota on a brick, they entombed them alive in the buildings, just like we're talking about with the London Bridge. This is nothing new under the sun. The same thing that has been will be again. And so if you can study true history, it will help you to understand and identify the mechanics of what's taking place now so that you yourself will not be beguiled, deceived. That's what it's all about, finding the truth and adhering to it. Guard the truth unto death, and Yahuwah will deliver you.
You're so right. It's the knowledge. You know, my people perish for lack of knowledge. It is the knowledge that helps us to not be deceived. I know for a fact that, you know, I've had this awareness about the New World Order, that it would be the system of Babylon. I just have had it since I was a child because I studied the occult, I studied the Bible, I knew what was coming. And so, you know, when I would warn people in church about this, they would think I was a nutter. All of those people are now injected. I'm not. You know, so, you know, and the people who believed what I was saying didn't go and get an injection. And it is the knowledge of this is the antidote. I'm not saying to dwell on it. You see, you're informing people of this, Nathan, and then you're giving them the antidote, which is Jesus, which is the Father, which is freedom, which is love, which is the truth that's found in the Word. So I really want to just talk to the people that don't believe this message today, and I know that there are some that watch because they'll watch the content even though they are just, you know, raging inside. Stop talking about this. It's okay. I love them anyway. For the people that are watching this that are of that belief system, you look around and you see your loved ones and you see all these people in a spell and you think, what has bewildered the world today? What is going on? These people can't see. Yes, they can't see because they have taken part in a contract that has enabled their deception. We were warned that would come in the last days. Now, I'm not saying we're at the very end, but they're trying to speed that along. That is what you're witnessing. The only antidote to that contract is to get out of it and give your free will, your consent over to the one who actually made you. And the power of Jesus to break that in your life is here, it's present, it's real today. And, you know, I think, Nathan, you've articulated that so well for people. I think that if they watch this and they still don't believe you, well, they maybe need to watch it again. Can you please let people know? We've got your website up on the screen. Can you let them know where they can follow you and learn more about what you're doing and your work?
Absolutely. They can go to my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Nathan Reynolds. That's what I'm most frequently uploading and utilizing. We've got, I believe, 320 videos up there from the first documentary that was ever made about that case, Jessica Ridgway case, and my wife and I sharing our testimony and kind of coming out of it all the way up to now. I have my audio scriptures for Snatched from the Flames on there as well. And I just did an entire recording of the audio scriptures. I believed it was important for people to have access to the word. And I wanted that washed over me. I needed to be washed with a new mind. And I've been washed with the ways of the world for so long that I knew I needed to be restored. And that came for me through diligent efforts of reading something that mattered and of sacrificing my time and my energy and my efforts there. So snatchedfromtheflames.com is one place they can go. They can also go to youtube.com/Nathan Reynolds. It's the best place. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, you can email me at snatchedfromtheflames@protonmail.com as well. And I really appreciate you taking the time to advance the kingdom of truth, and that I do hope people would take considerate time to choose this day who you're going to serve. You've got 24 hours today. You have the same amount of time as I do. And you know what? There are time bandits day and night out there finding a way to steal your time, trying to find a way to steal your time. But your time is precious. You are precious. You are loved. You are cared for. You were created for a purpose, for a destiny. And I pray that you would come to find that destiny. And I know that it is found when you seek with all your heart diligently the kingdom of creation, the hope of the Creator. I love you all. Thank you for giving me a chance to be here.
Amen. Thank you so much, Nathan. God bless you.
Likewise.
We are so grateful to Nathan for sharing his story and awakening the world to the fact that this is still occurring today, and it explains so much of what is going on around us. ZEEE Media is committed to exposing the darkness in order to shine the light even brighter. It's one of our main jobs, and directing people to Jesus is a very, very important part of that. It's something that we've never hidden from the world, and we never will. If you're not following us on our social media platforms, you can find us on Telegram under ZEEE Media with 3 E's, one word. You can also find me on Instagram under Maria Z, and we encourage everyone to subscribe to our Rumble channel, Maria Z, to stay up to date with all of our latest content. And as always, you can find us on zeemedia.com. It's our platform. No one's touching it. And we promise to continue bringing the truth to the world. God bless.